Frank Hyder is a well-known, renowned visual artist. When he started to become an artist, he thought the journey would be a straightforward progression. Over the years, he has discovered that the road has many twists and turns, numerous hills and valleys, and countless challenges. Through this series of short stories, tales, and remembrances, his hope is that these will offer some valuable insight into the life of an artist and what's involved in becoming an artist. In the end, he has come to realize that he is not a painter or sculptor or anything in particular. He is more simply a creative person with great passion and love for the process of making art concerning people and the world around us, who shares his artworks with the public. Join us now as we listen to another episode of A Life in Art series.
In 2000, I was awarded an international senior Fulbright research grant, which would enable me to spend a year in South America and afforded me enough money that I could afford to pay the rent on a house and a studio and really re-engage myself in my work. I had been teaching and painting on a very rigorous schedule. I kept having shows in different places, and I had a teaching job which required my presence a minimum 3 days a week. And there was really no downtime. And I think artists don't need to rest, but they need reflecting time. So I was longing for that. And when the occasion arrived and we went to Venezuela, I said to myself, I've spent these last 15 years creating a reputation as this artist who works in these wood and carves into these paintings and mixes painting with woodcuts, etc. And I said, I want to have maybe alter that identity. And so I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on paper. I want to be a paper artist for a while. And what I was focusing on was on paper that I had discovered that had fragments of plant life embedded in it. And I was buying these sheets of paper with little pieces of leaves and flowers embedded in the paper. So when I went to Venezuela, I knew that was going to be part of what I was going to work with. And I was going to be open-minded about what I was going to paint and what images were going to be made. So I started in the humblest and simplest of ways by just walking around on the property that we had rented at the top of a mountain. I would walk around the property and just sit and draw from trees and plants and things like that. And it was really very invigorating. I discovered that I had closed my eyes to so many things because the demands of my job and of my exhibition schedule required me to focus on making productive pieces. And I really didn't have that space for investigation. And now I was going to start an investigation in the most authentic way I could, which was very simply from the very, very, very starting point of just small black and white drawings and see where it went. It wasn't very long before I was taking these sheets of paper that I had acquired and joining them together and making larger sheets out of them. And the method I was using to join them together was I would take acrylic medium and tracing paper, rolls of tracing paper. I roll the tracing paper out, put the medium on, and then press these sheets of paper on top of it. And I could make, instead of having a piece of paper that was 22 by 30 inches, I could suddenly have a piece of paper that was 44 by 60 inches. And it resembled the smaller piece, but it was 4 times as big. So that was a starting point. And then I began to realize I could do this myself by picking up plants and fabric of the forest and layering it between 2 sheets of tracing paper and create even larger sheets of this paper, which had elements of the forest. So now I was thinking to myself, I'm painting literally on the floor of the forest. I'm picking something up off the floor and putting it between two pieces of paper and making an image on top of that. So I began making paintings that way and building images that way. And then that gradually, as I would paint and walk every day, I would walk from my studio at the top of the mountain all the way down to the village and then walk back. And it was quite a walk, energized wise. It was uphill and downhill both ways. It was a good, healthy walk. And it gave me a chance to really just look at nature and stare at things. And as I would walk, I would see things like I would see seeds, and I would see cocoons for insects, and all kinds of different forms were coming into my head. So at some point along the way, I got the idea, we had so much bamboo on the property, I got the idea to cut some of the bamboo and try to make some things that resembled the forms I was seeing on my walk. And as I would build these shapes, because I had never built sculpture before, this was my first experience, as I would put these together, I would then cover them with the paper that I was making that involved picking up leaves and plant forms from nature and embedding them between these two sheets of tracing paper. So I would cover my form. So I was making canoes in the beginning that resembled cocoons, and they had these little plant fragments in them. And I was really involved in and enjoying making these forms. And when the opportunity came up to do an exhibition someplace, I would go to the site and I would invite art students from the college or university close by to come and make the paper with me. So they would all be picking up plant forms and laying them on these sheets of tracing paper, and we'd cover them with the acrylic medium, press them out, and I would build a form, a structure, and then we'd stretch these things over the structure and then hang the sculpture in space, and then shine lights onto the piece, and that would throw shadows on the floor and on the wall, and it would also illuminate the inside of the forms. And I was really becoming kind of engaged by all of that, and I did an installation in a place called Merida in the Andes Mountains, and the students were helping me do this, and everything was going great, except when we hung the piece in the room, I absolutely couldn't stand the floor. They had one of these terrazza type floors that had this emblem, some kind of official emblem of a university or something was on the floor. And I said, I'd like to get rid of that. And I came up with the idea, and I sent a couple of students off to get bags of leaves from a park. So they came back with these trash bags completely filled with leaves, and as they spread them out on the floor, the room was being transformed. But I had another idea, which was I noticed how the plants had an aroma to them, and it added another element. So now I had the sight, the light, I had the sensation of these forms hanging in space, and then I had this kind of a whiff of the smell of nature itself. So the very next installation I did, which was way bigger in a museum in Caracas, I had a big space that was about 40 feet long and 35 feet tall. So I had the canoes kind of dropping down in the space from the ceiling towards the ground by building several of these canoes that dropped into the space as if they were sort of descending. And then we hung all this paper up in the air on different levels, so the paper was ascending as the canoes were descending. And then on the floor in the space, I sent them out to get me tobacco leaves, and we covered the floor with tobacco leaves, and we made a little path through the tobacco leaves so you could walk without disturbing them. And then using colored lights, I projected light through the sculpture onto the floor, onto the walls, and created shapes and patterns that were connecting all the elements. And so what had happened was I was building an environmental sculptural installation that was really based on the world that I was living in and walking through and working in every day. And I was using elements that were plants from the forest. I was working with tools in the studio that were used traditionally for painting, but I was also now beginning to be a sculptor and creating sculptural forms and thinking about how light and color could be used. And I began to then paint the paper with transparent glazes of acrylic color, which would allow the paper to have a color presence and add yet one more dimension to these installations. So as the installation process was really coming together, I was called off to Maracaibo, where I had a big show in the biggest museum in the country, 30,000 square feet, where I hung 200 paintings that I had made in my year painting in Venezuela in the mountain. And I had 2 rooms with installations using these canoes and this paper and light. And because it was a museum, we had much better control on the lighting and how it worked. And it was really an eye-opening experience for me. I would then take that process when I came back to the United States, and I began to create installations. I did one in Chicago at the Navy Pier. I did another one in Art Miami in Miami Beach with a forest room. I did a show in Chelsea in New York at the Walter Wickheiser Gallery, where there was a forest room. You stepped through a door and you were completely in this, immersed in this forest space. I began to add the sound of dripping water on a soundtrack and the sounds of birds and things like that, so that the space got even a little bit more sensory aware. And as a result, I had really kind of moved from being a painter of heavy sort of stable things to a maker of very ephemeral and manipulatable and changeable room installations. And the process of that, plus the inventions and discoveries I was making, began to create the sculptures became more and more decisively formed and larger in scale and far more, in my opinion, far more finished in character. So something that sort of casually began had evolved into a really tangible, visible product. So I could actually lift elements out of that, put them on the wall by themselves, and have something that was worthy of exhibition.
Thank you for listening. If you have questions or suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to Frank Hyder on Facebook or Instagram. We hope to see you at one of the next A Life in Art episodes.